Good morning. So great to see you guys. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us online. For those of you in the room, I got to say it's great to see you. I missed you last week. This is way more fun when you were here than when I'm here by myself. I love you guys. I'm so glad we get to be a part of this together in the same room this week. That is great. If you watched online last week, you know we're kicking off a new message series on wisdom. It's called The Art of Adulting. Today we're going to explain that a little bit more. But I thought this morning it might be fun to do a little game. Are you guys okay if we do a little game? I'm going to put up a picture on the screen. It's going to have a lot of stuff on it. I want you to pull out your pen, your sheet of paper, and write down as many things from memory that you can remember of what I put on the screen. If you're sitting next to somebody, see if you can remember more than they do. Are you ready? Here we go. I'm going to put it up, and when I take it down, that's when you start writing. Soak it in. Soak it in. Go. All right. Write it down. How'd you do? Anybody get them all? Nobody got them all? Imagine with me for a second. This is a little silly, but imagine with me for a second that I said anybody in that amount of time, you could rewrite them all down, you would win $100,000. Or you would say, well, Rick, that is weirdly generous and frustrating because you didn't give us enough time. We just glimpsed at it. Could I suggest to you that there are too many people who live their lives that way? If God's word is a treasure chest of wisdom, too many people live their lives just taking a glimpse at it instead of really soaking in, spending time in it, looking at it, marinating in it so we could draw out all that it has for us. It is just too easy to look at it for a couple of minutes, to look at it for 30 minutes on a weekend, or maybe a few more minutes when we gather together with friends sometimes during the week. But if it really is a treasure chest of wisdom, the worst decision we could ever make is just to occasionally glimpse at it instead of really looking longingly into it, studying it, digging into it. I'm curious, have you ever heard of this guy, Dallas Willard? He was a philosopher, he was a Christian author. He shaped the way that many people think about spiritual disciplines. He's remembered for saying this: grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning. And last week, as we kicked off this series by looking at Proverbs 8, we discovered that God depicted or personified wisdom as a lady. And she is exactly that, a lady. She will invite you. She will not impose herself on you. And so if we're going to be wise, we have to dig in. We have to work. We have to strive. We have to chase after wisdom. We got to work. So welcome to week 2 of our series, The Art of Adulting. And this is what we mean by the art of adulting: to understand and skillfully engage with the full spectrum of reality. That is wisdom. That's what the Bible means when it talks about wisdom. This is what a grown-up, mature, adult life looks like. God has created this universe and all of life with a series of beautiful and complex cause and effect relationships. And that covers everything from medicine and math to the laws of logic to the principles that govern relationships. And an adult's responsibility, a wise person's responsibility, is to understand that and skillfully engage in how all of that works. And if you were to say to me, Rick, this definition seems kind of steep, feels a bit ambitious, doesn't it? I would say, well, what's the alternative? To misunderstand and incompetently engage with life and reality? I got way too much experience with that. I don't know about you, but I have missed the mark on this so many times in so many different ways. It is not funny. And anybody who takes a serious look at this, who really thinks about it, we realize when we miss the mark on this, it's bigger than mistakes, isn't it? We find ourselves in a tangled mess of moral consequences that drag us down and impact people who we care about who had nothing to do with the choice we made. If we dare to come face to face with this, we'll begin to see why we live in a world of broken moral messes and why there is a world of moral messes living inside of us. This is serious and it's heavy, but there is good news. This is our theme verse for the series, Proverbs 16:6. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. And this word sin right here, whatever biblical writers use that word, they mean missing the mark. And all the times that you and I miss the mark, the sum total of that, all the times we miss the mark on accident, all the times we miss the mark on purpose, those things can be atoned for. And this word means one person pays so that someone else can be free. And so this is how we summarize this. This is our series thesis. Love atones for sin, wisdom avoids it. This is what Jesus offers to anyone who trusts in him, that he will pay so that they will be free. And he offers it with ridiculous generosity. And this is good news that should never become old news. Because as we pursue wisdom, as we try to dig in and understand wisdom, if we do that, and especially what we're going to look at today, it means that sometimes we're going to have to look at our stories and look at the unpleasant stuff inside of our story. But because of this right here, because Jesus has set us free, we can get real about the messes in our stories without it crushing us. Because if you are in Jesus, if you've trusted in him, you are fully loved, fully accepted, and fully forgiven. He has set you free, and you are free to engage with the truth, even when it's messy. And there is a word, there's an old theological word used to describe this. It's a word that old school pastors use. It's a word that we should use. We should know and understand it, and that word is justification. When we are justified, it means that God sees us no longer as morally guilty. He sees us as morally righteous. That if you are in Jesus, God sees you with the same status of moral perfection that Jesus has. And it's not because of what you do or what I do. It's because of what Jesus did. And we receive that by trusting in him. And because it's not based on what we do, we are secure in him. And because we are secure, we're able to be vulnerable and honest. This is the only way that we could ever be vulnerable and honest about the real messes inside of us, because we are utterly secure in Jesus. This is why, for those of you who are here today and you would say that you got doubts or you got unanswered questions that keep you from trusting in Jesus, I'm so glad you're here. This is why we want to answer every question that you have. That's why we create classes like Starting Point, which I hope that you'll sign up for. It's because we want you to see and behold Jesus, that when you trust in him, he sets us free. And as you are on your journey of trying to be wise and trying to dig in and get real, if you haven't trusted in Jesus, you're on your own to justify and atone for yourself. And my heart breaks. I deeply care for men and women who find out too late in life there's no amount of career success. There's no amount of financial accomplishment. There's no amount of altruism. There's no amount of dream fulfillment. There's no amount of doing any good thing that will atone and pay for the weight of sin and moral messes in our lives. Only Jesus does that. Only Jesus can make us free. And it's by his faithfulness and his love. And the on-ramp to wisdom is to revere him. The on-ramp to wisdom is to be in awe of him. And so today we're going to look again at the next section in Proverbs chapter 8, and we're remembering that this is wisdom personified, depicted as a lady, and she's speaking to us. She says this, I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. You know what this word means? This word prudence, it means craftiness. So if we're going to be wise, we have to become friends with being savvy, with being shrewd, with being strategic in our decision making. She goes on, I possess knowledge and discretion. And this word means the ability to understand the purpose behind things, to understand how things interlace and connect together. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance and evil behavior and perverse speech. Can I ask you a question? How impressed are you with you? How impressed are you with you? To the degree that there is pride inside of you and inside of me, to that same degree, we are enemies of wisdom. To the degree that there is pride inside of you and inside of me, to that same degree, we are foolish. She goes on, she says this, counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight, I have power. By me kings reign and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern and nobles, all who rule on earth. I love those who love me. This is not conditional love, but this is love that can only be experienced by those who choose to be in a love affair with wisdom. Those who seek me find me. With me are riches and honor, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than fine gold. What I yield surpasses choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness, along the paths of justice, bestowing a rich inheritance on those who love me and making their treasuries full. Does that sound good? Let's do a little reading comprehension test. Does true or false, wisdom hates pride? True, you got that one right. True or false, wisdom hates arrogance? True. Doesn't wisdom seem a little full of herself? And she's making some pretty bold, audacious claims about herself. I'm amazing. This is all I offer you. How do we square that? How is it that wisdom can make these kinds of claims and at the same time say we should not be prideful or arrogant? We've got to understand exactly what wisdom is. Wisdom is an attribute of God. It emerges from God and it is a gift from God. When we understand wisdom, we are understanding who God is. When we live with wisdom, we're living in harmony with who he is. It's an attribute of who he is. It emerges from him. It is a gift from him to us. There is nothing more profound, nothing greater that we could set the trajectory of our life chasing after, nothing greater that we could set our affections on than wisdom. And today I want us to key in on one particular facet, one particular aspect of wisdom. In verse 14, she says to us, counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight. I have power. Why is it that some people experience the power of wisdom in their life and other people just miss it? Why do you think that is? Is it because some people are just smart and some people are dumb? Just dummies. That's not it. It comes down to, believe it or not, one very simple, straightforward, and easy decision. It's what that hinges on. But before I share with you what that decision is, let me read this. She says this. She says, I love those who love me. Those who seek me find me. If you want the power of wisdom deployed in your life, if you want wisdom to love you back, we have got to embrace the art of adulting. We have got to embrace this one simple, straightforward, very key decision. You ready to know what it is? Adults pre-decide how they'll think, not what they'll think. It's this right here. It comes down to this. Adults, people who choose to be wise, just pre-decide how they're going to think, not what they'll think. To be an adult, to be a wise person means, hey, listen, before I know what the future holds, before I know what other people are going to do, before I know what it is going to cost me, no matter what, I am going with wisdom. I just pre-decide. I'm going with what wisdom says. When it comes to my money, no matter what I might feel in all the future moments of life, going with wisdom. Friday, I got a call from the local Ford dealership, and they offered to buy my truck back from me, and it was my day off. I had nothing to do. There's snow everywhere. I can't play golf, so I went. Just give them a chance, and they were great. They were fantastic, and they made me an offer to buy my truck back, which means I wouldn't have a car, and so I sat in a newer truck. And as I was sitting there, I began to have all the feels. Well, this truck has things my truck doesn't have. And my brother, in God's graciousness, my brother called me while I'm at the Ford dealership. And I told him what I was doing. And he said, remember what Dave Ramsey says? You got walk away power. So I walked away. No matter what I feel in all the future moments of life, I pre-decide I'm going with wisdom. When it comes to sex, no matter what I feel in all the future moments of life, I'm going with wisdom. When it comes to the highs and lows and navigating all the various relationships in my life, no matter what I might feel in the future moments of life, I just pre-decide I'm going with wisdom. This next one I'm going to say is an easy one to speed past. I'm going to ask you to marinate in it. When it comes to the tension between my preferences and living for a purpose that is bigger than myself, the tension between my preferences and living for a purpose that's bigger than myself, no matter what I feel in the future moments of life, I pre-decide I'm going with wisdom. Because adults know two things. Number one, My emotions are too easily manipulated in the moment. I cannot wait for the moment to decide if I want to be wise. I pre-decide. Number two, adults understand this, that what I think as I grow in understanding, as I get more information, as I better understand reality, that what I think is going to expand and change and evolve, and that's okay. What I think will change. How I think must never change. And so I want to make this personal, and I want to make this really practical. If we're going to be wise, we got to pre-decide how we're going to have, what kind of relationship we're going to have with one particular thing. And this is it. What is our relationship going to be with correction? Who loves being corrected? I'll count. Hold on. Who loves watching other people be corrected? Tell the truth. Jesus is watching. I love watching other people be corrected. That's great. I want to share with us a couple of things that Proverbs has to say to us about correction. And our responsibility is this, pre-decide. We're just going to pre-decide what kind of relationship do we want to have. Proverbs 12 says this, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Can I ask you, who have you given access to you? Who have you given access to your life? Who have you given permission to challenge what you think? Who have you given permission to challenge how you think? Proverbs 12 also says this, whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is, what's that word? Say it like you mean it now. There you go. When my kids were little, I loved reading this verse to them. Mom may not let you say stupid, but Jesus does. All right, note takers, I want you to write this down. This is a good one. The difference between the wise and the fool is not that one avoids mistakes. It's that one avoids correction. No person ever completely avoids mistakes in their life. The difference, though, between wise and foolish people is not avoiding this, is that one, the fool, avoids this. What are you like when you're corrected? Are you an easy person to correct? Could I suggest that I don't think ever before have we so desperately needed to hear this collectively? And I don't think there's ever a moment in my life when I don't need to hear this individually. Adulting is not being on a hunt for affirmation. Adulting is being on a hunt for wisdom, and it means becoming friends with being corrected. Stern discipline awaits anyone who leaves the path. The one who hates correction will die. If you were able to watch the message last week, you remember God is the one who sets moral boundaries, and we can cross those, but what we can't do is we can't change the consequences. There are real consequences that come with violating his boundaries. Mockers resent correction. So what do? They avoid the wise. What kind of relationship do you want to have with correction? And so I want to make this personal, and I want to make it practical, and I want to suggest a few things. They're not going to be on the screen, so if there's anything helpful that you hear, just write it down. If you want to be wise, don't be passive with correction. Don't just wait for people to correct you. Be active. Be aggressive with it. If there's an area in your life where you're like, I could be more wise, I want to grow, find someone who is thriving in that area, who is wise in that area, and go to them and ask for their perspective. Ask them to scrutinize you and to offer up advice. Here's one area that everybody's got to do this in life eventually is with our finances, and we probably need to do that from time to time throughout life. If there's someone who's ahead of you and they're living with wisdom, just ask if you could sit down with them, share with them your budget, share with them your bills, share with them the decisions you're making, and allow them to scrutinize you and correct you. Is it going to feel good? It ain't. It's not going to feel good. But that's okay. We don't have to like the experience to love the wisdom of it. You know what adults do? You know what wise people do? They go on a hunt for information that they know might show them that they're wrong. And as they learn and as they grow, wise people say, adults say, I'm going to change my attitude, change my behavior, I'm going to change my thinking, I'm going to change whatever I have to change in order to be in alignment with reality. Here's the second thing that adults do, that wise people do. They bend their schedules and they make calendar commitments to be around wise people. They commit on their calendar to spend time with other people who are on a journey, who are on the same kind of pursuit for wisdom. This is one of the reasons that we so value getting together in small groups. This is why this is so important. What could keep you? What could keep you from being around other people who love you, who will encourage you, who will speak truth into your life? And if you say, Rick, I'm already in a group, let me ask you this question. Have you given them permission to speak into your life? Have you given them permission to say hard things to you? If you're in a group, I bet you're in a group with kind, polite people. Kind, polite people tend to wait for permission. How many of you love it? You're just drawn to people who give you advice without you asking for it. Nobody else? Okay. Because you're in a group with kind and polite people. Give them permission. Do they know that you want them to lovingly speak truth in your life, even when it might be hard to see? When you have a blind spot, do you want them to point it out? Wise people, adults, just pre-decide, I want that. Now, there's another thing that gets in the way of our understanding. It gets in the way of our growth, and we just got to break up with it. You want to know what it is? We got to break up with being judgmental. We just got to break up with being judgmental. Any fool can judge. The wise seek to understand. Any fool can judge. The wise seek to understand. Do you lead with assumptions or do you ask questions? What I want to suggest is that wisdom is asking questions more than making assumptions. See, a wise person wants to understand. A fool just wants to make you understand. Do you ask questions? Now, it's totally okay to say, wait a second, this seems wrong. This seems off. This doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem wise. We got to do that. But this is what a wise person does. A wise person says, well, this doesn't seem right, or this doesn't seem wise, or this seems off. I bet there's more stuff that I don't yet know, so I'm going to suspend judgment until I can find out more. A wise person is eager and quick to understand. A foolish person is quick and eager to air their opinion and just make a judgment. Do you lead with assumptions? Do you lead with statements? Or do you lead with questions? And those times you're like, why would the government do that? Why would the school board do that? Not that you'd ever say this. Why would the pastors at my church do that? Why would my neighbor do that? I heard a pastor say one time, when we find ourselves in those moments, we're not really making a statement about another person. We're making a statement about ourselves. We don't understand. A wise person says, well, what do I got to ask? How can I understand? A foolish person just says, I'll judge that. Has anyone ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? The Dunning-Kruger effect is the thing that explains why the less competence we have with something, the more confident we are in talking about it. Have you experienced that? Like, I don't know why some of you guys went to medical school. You could just read Facebook and be an expert. The Dunning-Kruger effect also explains why the more competent you are with something, the more humble you are when you talk about it. That there is this thing in human nature that the more well-off you are, the more educated you are, and the more accomplished you are. The more vulnerable you are to assuming that your expertise extends to areas that it actually doesn't. Does that make sense? We have a tendency to overestimate ourselves. Because we understand this, we just assume we understand everything. We live in one of the most educated cities in the United States. We live in one of the most educated cities on the planet. This is a community, and this is a church full of well-off, accomplished, educated, brilliant people. You know what that means? Is that we have a vulnerability to overestimating our expertise and applying it to areas where we're not experts. This is one of the reasons why following Jesus requires us to admit our vulnerabilities and to embrace humility. Being wise, it is not for the weak-kneed or the faint-hearted, is it? Being wise takes humility, and it takes courage. This is why it's so important, our attitude, toward correction will either reward us or ruin us. So let me ask you again, what kind of relationship do you want to have with correction? It's a pre-decision. If I'm allowed, if it's okay, if I can kind of crank up the heat on that question a little bit, how much foolishness are you willing to tolerate in you? How much foolishness am I willing to tolerate in me? How much foolishness are we just going to allow to exist? Last week I introduced this guy, Henry Cloud. If he's not on your reading list, I'd love for him to be on your reading list. He's just straightforward. He says this, you get what you tolerate. And I'm suggesting let's be people who don't tolerate foolishness. Let's be people who don't tolerate anything that would slow down or get in the way of our chase of wisdom, of our love affair with wisdom. And as we're thinking about that, did you know that there are ways of thinking that actually stop thinking? That there are ways of thinking that keep us from understanding and learning and growing. Now, there are probably more that I can list, that I could list than the amount of time that we have, but I want to hit just a few. Now, these are ways of thinking that adults refuse to tolerate, that people who are committed to wisdom, they refuse to tolerate these ways of thinking. You ready to know what they are? Okay. It was meant to be, or everything happens for a reason. I cringe every time I hear these bits of anti-wisdom propaganda. Not everything that is was meant to be. It is not true that everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for reasons. Not everything happens for a reason. And this slogan right here has become an excuse for people to throw up their hands in fatalistic thinking. And God has designed this universe and all of life and this beautiful, complex series of cause and effect relationships, and wise people, adults, our responsibility is to understand that. And if we don't understand why something happens, it's totally okay to say, I don't know why that happened. It's a totally different thing to say it was meant to be. Now, did God preordain and predecide that certain things are going to happen no matter what we do? You bet he did. Absolutely. But God is not the decisive or the determinative cause behind every single thing that happens. His word tells us this, Proverbs 19, a person's own folly leads to their ruin, yet their heart rages against the Lord. Raul Agrawal is a pastor in Georgia. He's a guy I went to seminary with, and I love how he summarizes that verse. A person's own folly, a person's own foolishness brings ruin to their life, and yet they get mad at God about it. And the way that he summarizes it like this is, I just made it a fill in the blank. He said, never blame God's sovereignty for things that are actually the result of your irresponsibility. There are lots of things God didn't do. We did it. Now, is God sovereign? Is God the authority over all things? Yes. Is God in the business of making broken things new? Yes. And if you are in Jesus, you need to know the promise that comes from Romans chapter 8, that God causes all the good and bad things. He doesn't cause those things, but if you are in Jesus, he will cause them to work out for your good. And the reason that you and I need God's gracious intervention in our life is because there are lots of things that are not the way he meant for them to be. Here's another way of thinking that adults refuse to tolerate because it just slows down our ability to understand. I'm entitled to my opinion. That's ended a lot of arguments, hasn't it? Now, if by this you mean, well, I'm entitled to my own thoughts and my own preferences, well, absolutely. Like, I'm entitled to my opinion that a dinner without vegetables tastes better. I'm not entitled to the opinion that a dinner without vegetables is better. And too many people use this as a license to ignore facts and reality. I read something from a college philosophy professor who said this has become the slogan to give shelter to beliefs that should have been abandoned long ago. Here's one more. Here's another way of thinking that if we embrace it, it's going to make us hard to think well. We're not going to grow in understanding, and it's this, equating negative thoughts with unpleasant thoughts. There's a difference between these two. Do you know the difference? Negative thinking is always assuming the worst about yourself, others, and situations in life. It's seeing yourself, other people, and situations in life in the most uncharitable way possible. It is a way of being prejudiced, and it is not good for you. It will cause you to misunderstand and incompetently engage with the full spectrum of life and reality. Don't tolerate negativity. Don't tolerate negative thinking. But there's a difference between that and unpleasant thoughts. And people who misunderstand the difference between these two things, they end up with tattoos like this: no regrets. Now, I don't know if you know anybody who has this slogan. And maybe some of us have toyed with this idea: I don't have any regrets. I'm not thinking about anything unpleasant. Well, you can have that slogan in life, but I don't know how you can have that slogan in life and have friends. Are you kidding me? Are you mean to tell me that whenever you do something intentionally or unintentionally and it hurts the people you care about, you're going to look them in the eye and say, no regrets? Come on now. Could I suggest to you that there is no way to be wise without sitting down in and marinating in unpleasant thoughts? Some years ago, I heard a guy talk about the aftermath of his sexual affair. And in the week after it became public knowledge, he went home and he found his wife lying on the living room floor in the fetal position, sobbing in anguish. That's not pleasant, is it? And that might be the kind of thing that some of us want to skip past, but I just decided, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to imagine that that's my wife in the fetal position on the floor, sobbing. What would it do to Heather? What would it do to my kids if I broke my promise to be faithful? Now, you could do this with anything. Pick any good thing in life you want: career success, financial achievement, sexual fulfillment, dignity and acceptance, freedom. For however long you live, there will be unending invitations to exit off the pathway of wisdom and to turn to hollow promises of immediate satisfaction. And what I'm saying is, play the movie forward. Imagine yourself on the other side of that choice. Play the movie forward all the way to the end, all the way to the bitter end. This is a gift of wisdom. It allows us to connect the dots between today's choices and tomorrow's experiences. And what we're talking about today, this is the essence of wisdom. This is, believe it or not, the essence of the gospel. And there are other approaches to life that you can take, like a religious approach and an irreligious approach. And they might look very different, but at the bedrock level, they are the same. A religious approach and an irreligious approach to life focuses on your choices and the outcomes you can achieve. That is not wisdom, and that is not the gospel. Instead, the gospel begins and wisdom begins with what we believe and how we think. This is why the Apostle Paul would write this: do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, by changing the way you think. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. There are things that only Jesus can do that we can't do. Moving from the status of spiritually dead to spiritually alive, Jesus accomplished that. We receive that by trusting in him. Moving from status of morally guilty to being seen as morally righteous, we can't accomplish that. Jesus did that. We receive that by trusting in him. But changing our lifestyles, changing our routines and habits, that happens. Those are transformed by us changing the way that we think to match the way that he thinks. And wise people, adults, people who are devoted to Jesus understand that that's not decided in the moment. It's pre-decided long before the moments get here. And in those moments, it's affirmed moment by moment. So I want to end with this. Wisdom is far more about making pre-decisions than it is about making good decisions. Yes, this is important, but it hinges on this. And so let me ask, what have you pre-decided is going to be your authority? Who have you pre-decided to trust most? What kind of pre-decision are you going to make of your relationship with wisdom, your relationship with correction?